Welcome to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the Strategy Corp Institute of Public Policy and Economy. I'm your host, Mitch Davidson. Today, we're joined by the MPP for Nipissing, the Honourable Vic Fedeli, who is Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, the current Chair of Cabinet. In his 3 terms at Queen's Park, the Minister has had the pleasure of serving as Finance Minister, as leader of the official opposition, and once upon a time as my boss. Before being elected to Queen's Park, he was a multiple-term mayor in North Bay and ran a successful advertising company, of which the topic of today, which is attracting investment, something he's innately qualified to talk about. So Minister Fedeli, thank you very much for coming on the program today.
Thanks, Mitch. I really appreciate the chance to chat today a little bit about our Invest Ontario, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so on a personal note, good to see you. Haven't seen you since before the pandemic started. So although it being through Zoom a bit different, but good to catch up. And so I should put out a little disclosure first, which is just to say that I recently published a paper with Ontario 360, the Monk School think tank, entitled "Attracting 21st Century Investment: A Blueprint for the Creation of Invest Ontario and Invest Alberta." And we're going to be talking a bit about that paper today. You can find it on our website at strategycorp.com/institute or at on360.ca. So, Minister, for people who haven't read the paper, there's a lot of people out there might not want to read 7,000 words, might want to watch the video instead. Let's just start with an intro to the topic of investment attraction in the province. Invest Ontario, you created it as a one-stop shop for prospective investors and businesses. I've got a quote here from July when it was announced last year saying, "This team will be all about deal hunting, deal structuring, and ultimately deal closing." So just tell us, how is Invest Ontario going to do that and why now?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the paper, Mitch. I did read it, of course, and I did watch the video as well. It was quite interesting. And obviously, Invest Ontario is something that we're pretty excited about. And I think it's going to be something that's incredibly important to the economic recovery of Ontario and hopefully in the near future. Invest Ontario is a new agency of the province of Ontario, and it's really all about promoting the province as a key destination for investment, making Ontario competitive, sending a really strong signal to the investors. You've heard the Premier say it 1,000 times. Ontario is open for business and open for jobs. And so we've really worked on a business climate that I'd love to chat a lot more about. That really is where we see the role of government, and that's to create this environment for the businesses so that they can grow here.
And so tell me about the one-stop shop idea, right? Because I think it's pretty central to the core thesis of Invest Ontario. How difficult is it to get a project through and to get those signals from government that it's something that they would actually like to see happen? So why the one-stop shop specifically?
Well, we think it's very important that it be one-stop for business and for investors. When you think about government, we don't move at the same speed that business moves. And so this one-stop shop, we're going to call it all kinds of things. We think this is really up for the deal hunters and deal closers more than anything. They've got to be the closers. And so we know that we want to offer a red carpet service, a white glove service. You can mix all these metaphors, but we want something that's going to support our strategic firms, the domestic firms, as well as attracting FDI from around the world. But really, it's all about, when you think of my title as the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, this puts it all together. And this is all about creating really good jobs in Ontario. I think, you've got the chief salesperson, Premier Ford. Nobody puts in sweat equity, or I'll call it shoe leather, like we did. And we can talk about that later when we talk about doing, for instance, auto deals and Ford Canada, and we can talk about the shoe leather that the Premier and I put into that. And so this group will be this one stop, this white glove service that will take care of our clients around the world.
Right. So I haven't heard the term shoe leather before. So appreciate that one. That's a good debut on the podcast. But maybe it's just one other quick table setter just for context before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of the agency and how it's going to work. How is the setup of that agency coming so far? Are they actively up and running and searching for mandates, or are you still sort of putting some of the pieces together behind the scenes? Where are we at in terms of where Invest Ontario is formalized?
So this started a long time ago, pre-COVID. So we acknowledge that we do need to be able to compete with the other investment attraction agencies around North America. And so we were looking to put a blue chip board together of really seasoned business people, diverse backgrounds, diverse regions of Ontario. And so we're extremely close to announcing the next setup, or the next piece of it. Will announce the board very, very shortly, and you'll see that these are real accomplished leaders in the business community. So once the board is established, it will be their job then to go out and hire their CEO and put their team together, and it will be independent, absolutely independent of government.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a perfect segue. And if you want to announce the board on the podcast, you feel free. You're entitled
Might
to
be
do
the last thing I get to do as minister.
yeah, but we'd appreciate it. So, but speaking of the independence of it, so historically, Ontario's had a bit of a rocky past with investment attraction. I think specifically of Auditor General's report when you were an opposition MPP about grants going out the door on an invite only basis, or a lack of transparency about who was getting how many dollars and why, and what the conditions of deals were, all that kind of stuff. So now you've got an agency that's going to be theoretically responsible for a lot of this in and of itself. Are you worried about that transparency with an agency that's separate from the government, or is this actually something that could be more transparent? So how do you set that up when you're thinking about the mandate of Invest Ontario?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I remember those days, Mitch. I remember going into the legislature and talking about the fact that everybody, of all the people that received money, not one of them had applied. And of every single one who applied for money, none of them got any money. None of them were approved. And I remember that very well. I remember that exact speech in the legislature that day. So taking that and looking at the difference, we're really going to have this independent body that is going to have full transparency, full disclosure. You'll hear more about our plans of how we intend to do that. But they really have to still answer to the taxpayer. But we know that we want to balance that oversight requirement that we're going to put with this rapid response capability. That's going to be the important difference, the ability to make decisions quickly, but informed decisions. And that's why this blue chip board will be able to do that. But they'll also have meaningful metrics. They'll have KPIs put in place. You'll hear more about that as well, because we want to work with our competitive business environment first and foremost.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because it's probably not what a lot of people think government's necessarily apt at doing, right? Both acting fast and reacting quickly, and also getting it right. So using this independent agency to meet that sort of triumvirate of goals is an interesting idea. And I guess the one thing that's potentially quite helpful for you is that lots of other jurisdictions have gone down this road, especially in the United States, maybe not so much in Canada, but have gone down this road to attract investment in highly competitive climates. So you have some places to look at, be it Michigan or Ohio or others, for some of those KPIs and things. But I do want to ask one other one that I guess you could sort of qualify as table setting, but kind of getting into the meat of the issue, which is, the agency was announced in the summer of 2020 when, I think we all naively thought that the pandemic was kind of in its earlier days, maybe in its final days. It turns out it was just kind of starting. And business decisions really stopped, right? There's lots of different changing consumer behaviors, the rise of e-commerce, working from home. I can just imagine that not a lot of companies were saying, now's the right time for us to make a big multi-million-dollar investment in a new headquarters or move our offices or those sorts of things. So how has the pandemic changed foreign direct investment in the province? And if anything, has it sort of accelerated the case or the need for an agency like this?
Well, this is really a tale of two stories. I mean, certainly COVID-19, the pandemic has resulted in unbelievably unprecedented impacts right across the world, including here in Ontario. But, I think you're right about the summer when we weren't sure if it was over and we are starting to plan and get deep into it. And just think, not too long after the summer, we had some major billion-dollar announcements in the auto sector. We can talk about that after if you'd like.
Mhm.
Nothing that makes us happier than talking about that great change. But if you look here, just the month of February, we regained 100,000 jobs, and in the last 9 months, we regained over 800,000 jobs. But the most fascinating statistic in all that is this morning, Mitch, 27,000 more men and women woke up to go to a job in manufacturing this morning than
Hmm.
did pre-COVID. And that, the last February, we're up 27,000 manufacturing jobs. And that's all about the fact that we had all these fundamentals that we put in place for business, and they're all still here. These were put in pre-COVID. And the Premier talks about the fact that when we took office, Ontario had become a higher cost jurisdiction. And we wanted to start pulling all the levers we could in government to bring that cost of doing business down. And we saw that happen. And so, last year we talked about the fact that we'd reduced the cost of doing business by $5 billion a year. Well, this year, we're now up to $7 billion a year. And we lowered hydro rates by between 14 and 16% on January 1.
Mhm.
And we lowered the provincial share of your local property taxes on January 1 by 450 million. So we're now a lower cost jurisdiction by $7 billion a year. And that's things like $2 billion in WSIB, that workplace safety insurance, that we've reduced the premiums without reducing the benefits, about $1 billion a year in an accelerated capital cost allowance. And the list goes on and on, but it adds up to $7 billion. So all those fundamentals are still here, and it gives us this positive momentum. And that's why we've heard from so many companies who've made record investments. So we have that side of it. But when you look at the last decade or decade and a half, I think you pointed out rather well in your paper too, and in your the video of it, our investment attraction has been lagging compared to our peers.
Mhm.
So we've got a tremendous amount of work to do, but we've got this lower cost jurisdiction that we have working for us as well.
Yeah, it's a great point, because I think something that I've always kind of pointed out is if you want to do business in Canada, it's pretty hard to not do business in Ontario, right? It's the largest province population wise. If you want to be listed on the TSX or something like that, you've got to be in the province. Like, there's lots of reasons as to why you kind of have to end up here. And so Ontario kind of got a little bit of a benefit of just naturally being the home of the financial industry, having the provincial and federal capital in its jurisdiction. But you talk now about the things that you're doing to become more competitive on the business side. A lot of other jurisdictions are doing that at the same time. So does Invest Ontario and your ministry take on a bit of a role, not just of attraction, but in promotion of Ontario and trying to get that message out? Because probably a lot of people, even within the province, don't know about these measures, let alone companies who might not operate here.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And now more than ever, I think it's really critical to position Ontario as this top tier destination for investment, both domestic and international companies. They're starting to revisit their investment strategies and their business plans. I can tell you two anecdotes here. I was speaking with the consuls general of the G7 countries. And the first two of them that piped up said, we are going to be reshoring as many companies as possible. Like, wow, not only do we have our work cut out for us, we've got to make sure the ones that are here aren't leaving.
Mhm.
So that's a really, really critical point. And to the other point you mentioned, I was on a teleconference or a video conference with a large manufacturer in France. And I'm telling him about the $7 billion. And I'm watching, he's feverishly taking notes. And he's talking to his staff. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. So it tells us we've got a big job to do. I use that $7 billion story probably 5 times a day on calls. And still, see, we get tired of it ourselves and think, oh, everybody must know by now, but they don't. It's an amazing statistic. So I think Invest Ontario has a great platform from which to go out to the world and start talking about the great things that are happening all across Ontario.
It's the old, I think it's the old Dalton McGuinty line, right? Where he used to say, when I get sick of hearing myself say it, it's the first time that someone's actually heard it, right? So yeah, the point taken about having to repeat it over and over. So you've got this attractive sort of investment package now in terms of the savings and competitiveness that businesses can have. But a lot of the things you mentioned are financial, right? You've got property tax breaks and WSIB payment reductions and those sorts of things, which is definitely part of the equation. But the other part is this regulatory hurdle to get over, especially when you're bringing a new business or a new agency or something like that to the province. So, you might have to deal with your ministry for grants and loans. You might deal with municipal affairs and housing for zoning, labor for workers' comp or regulations related to the industry they're in, energy for hydro price relief, whichever sector. Maybe it's an agricultural business or a forestry business. You got to deal with that ministry. From the outside looking in, that list can get 7, 9, 10, 12 ministries long. It's obviously a hurdle for businesses. How hard is it internally to get those ministries to be on the same page, to get that one-stop shop approach actually running?
Well, you've been in government, it's fun. It's really important though, but we've got such great buy-in. And you're right, there are many ministries in Ontario that, in addition to our ministry, that are involved in economic development. OMAFRA has things like what's called the RED program. When I think of Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, they've got investment monies available to invest in the forestry sector. And we do some of those announcements together. I've been down to Oxford with Minister Hardeman to make agricultural investment announcements. He and I traveled together to, along with Minister Raymond Cho, to Korea and to Japan to sell our products. We've done that together. I've been with Minister Yakubuski from MNR to be able to talk about the investments that we made here down the highway from me in Northern Ontario, down in Rutherglen or down in St. Thomas. So we are working collaboratively, but you are correct. That's the role now of our investment attraction agency, is to have all that expertise under one roof. We don't want you to have to navigate that. We want our team, our Invest Ontario team, to be able to have all of that information at the fingertips so they can offer you all of those services, one-stop shopping. We really believe that that's critical, that we'll do all the navigating.
Yeah, and that's one of the points made in the paper, is that buy-in is really important from the other ministries within government, because if Invest Ontario just kind of becomes a Rolodex and says, here's the number to call, it defeats the purpose, right? And it's the moment that you deflect or you delay or you don't have the answers, the moment a business moves on to someone else who does. So
now, Premier Ford too, he'd never let that happen, right? That he wants these calls returned, and he and I, we're lifelong business people. We know exactly the right steps, and that's why we're so confident that Invest Ontario, in its independent form, they'll navigate all these for everybody.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to get to, is like the impact to individual communities on the ground. So before getting specifically to that question, you did mention auto, and I think we should probably talk about that a little bit. So you recently just published an article about buying North America instead of buying America. You talk about auto and trade with the US in that. Obviously, our auto industry is highly dependent on the American market. It's where we sell a lot of our vehicles to, and a lot of the parts and labor go back across the border multiple times. So when NAFTA was being renegotiated, and there was a lot of uncertainty about Canada's role in the auto industry, that's now settled with the USMCA labor agreement. And we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. You recently announced a new parts manufacturer from India, I noticed, was coming to Ontario. We've got the landmark deal shared with the federal government, reinvesting in the Ford plant in Oakville to go to electric vehicles. So what does the future of the auto industry, for sort of from the minister himself, look like?
I think it's a real big part of our future. In that article you talked about, I talked about building bridges, not barriers. And I think that's really, truly important. And a lot of it is going to be based on NAFTA 2.0. That's what I call it anyway, NAFTA 2.0. When you think of the rules of origin and mandating over the next 3 years that instead of 62.5% of the parts being manufactured in North America, goes up to 75%. And so we're saying to companies in Asia and companies in Europe, look, if you're shipping parts right now, you're not going to be able to do that likely, because these companies will have to pay that premium. So why don't you come over to Ontario and locate here? You're going to locate in North America. This is where we want you to be. And we constantly talk about the fact that we're the number 2 automaker in all of North America, just behind Michigan, not too far behind Michigan either. But we're also the number 2 IT cluster in all of North America, just behind Silicon Valley. Now you put those two together and you've got a really dynamic duo here. And that's why you saw Ford invest in Ottawa for a connected and autonomous vehicle research facility, 400 people there. BlackBerry QNX is just down the street from them in Ottawa with the same amount of people. General Motors in Markham with 700 people. I cut the ribbon at Uber on Bloor Street in Toronto before COVID, 300 people in their connected and autonomous vehicle division. So we've got that side that's exciting. We've got the parts, all of the parts that are exciting. And then the $6 billion that Ford, Fiat Chrysler, and General Motors announced in Ontario. $5 billion of it they announced in November, and another $1 billion earlier this year. All of that is new business. Think about General Motors reestablishing in Oshawa with 1,600 to 1,700 new people, and all of the parts chain that is going to come in to help build that pickup truck, and all of the parts that are going to be at their CAMI plant in Ingersoll for their electric delivery vehicle, and so on. So we've got big section of parts for the domestic suppliers. We've also got all of the opportunity for the critical minerals all through Northern Ontario. Cobalt in the town of Cobalt, where we just made a $5 million investment in a company called First Cobalt. Graphite in Hearst, lithium in Red Lake, and of course nickel in Sudbury. So we've got a real opportunity to be this auto giant that we were in the past.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned the sort of provincial-wide viewpoint, not only the sort of indirect that's maybe people don't think about right away, like the minerals in Northern Ontario, but even the direct ones, like saying where these factories are located in the auto industry, right? In Alliston and Ingersoll and places that are not, just in the Kitchener-Waterloo corridor, for example. What does Invest Ontario mean to the parts of the province that have been struggling for those mandates for some time? I mean, when we were in opposition, we went through a particularly bad time for manufacturing after the 2008 recession. There was lots of job losses that occurred, and you had these sort of towns that were built on one, maybe two major employers. And when they downsized or left town, it really had a lasting impact. Now you've got a bit of an opportunity here with auto, with work from home technology, perhaps, that these towns could be reinvigorated a little bit. So how focused are you on trying to get Invest Ontario to be something that can build the province up no matter which corner you're in, rather than just, say, bringing tech or financial companies to the downtown core?
Well, this is part of what we call the whole of Ontario approach that Invest Ontario has in their mandate. In fact, there is a requirement for a certain percentage of their directors to be from outside of the GTHA. And so that's put in and enshrined so that as we move on in our life, that will stay, because we understand how important these development programs are to the region. So think about Northern Ontario. I'm located in Corbeil, Ontario right now, birthplace of the Dion quintuplets. So here I am in a community. We have just down the street from me, a recipient of the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund grant. They make injection molded plastics on the same street as I live on, but quite a ways down here out in the country. NOHFC is a very important tool that Invest Ontario will have. If you locate in Northern Ontario, there's an opportunity for you to have some assistance and encouragement and inducement to locate in the north. But we've also got regional development programs, the Eastern Ontario Development Fund and the Southwestern Ontario Development Fund. Those are tools that we have to make very strategic investments, because that's part of the mandate, is to make sure that we are pan-Ontario. All of Ontario needs to be included in the thinking.
So, you mentioned in your riding in Corbeil and in North Bay in particular, I know I've seen the mayor out on a lot of social media and really promoting people to move to the region, especially given that they don't necessarily need to be located right next to their workplace anymore. Work from home technology, for example, myself working from home, don't need to be in the city necessarily. So have you seen that, just wondering anecdotally, have you seen that growth in the riding and in different areas across the province? And what does that mean for sort of when you're thinking about economic development? It seems that COVID has changed the sort of demographic picture of where people are residing and where they're using services. So does that play into it at all, trying to make sure that growth is a bit more equitable across the province? And are you just seeing that locally?
Yes, we're seeing it locally, and you're absolutely correct. It has not been distributed equitably across Ontario. Companies, are centered in Toronto, Waterloo region, Ottawa. That triangle, especially as a tech triangle, go a little further out to Oshawa and Windsor for the auto sector. But so this is really important that we put a regional lens on all the decisions that are made. Here in North Bay, it's more than anecdotal. It's backed by a little bit of statistics. For instance, the U-Haul company just announced that North Bay is their number one-way destination for U-Haul vehicles. That tells you they're coming into here. They're moving here. And I can tell you, down the highway a little bit in Loring, Ontario, a friend put their house for sale on a Friday and sold it on that Friday for $16,000 more than they were asking. I've never heard of that. I've lived here for 64 years, never heard of a single place ever selling for more than it was listed. That's commonplace in Toronto, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But we've never heard of that here, and it's happening all the time. And I saw in a little tiny town just south of me here in Powassan, Ontario, their first $500,000 listing. So it is not anecdotal. It is happening.
Yeah, so that's a theme that, as we kind of approach the end of the podcast, that I wouldn't mind picking at just a bit more, because this is a really interesting trend that maybe for the first time you could develop a sort of attraction plan or an economic growth plan where you bring people because they're bringing the jobs with them. It used to always be you try to bring the mandate and the people will follow, and now you can actually kind of do both. So with working from home, the advancement of technology, it seems that that's something that you can do. So do you think that's a trend that continues? And do you bring that into the thinking with Invest Ontario and within your ministry, or are you just kind of waiting for it to go back to normal right now?
I don't think it'll go back to normal. I think you've struck on a very good point here. Again, I'm in Corbeil, Ontario, town of 4,800 people. Why I can operate my part of the ministry from here is because we have broadband. So that's the point. Minister Laurie Scott and the Premier announced another $1 billion investment into broadband and a broadband strategy to have people connected by a certain period of time. That's going to be the game changer. And as long as that continues to be rolled out as it is, and rolled out successfully as it is being, that's going to allow you can sort of do whatever you want to do wherever you want to do it. And I think that's going to be the real game changer. I've done business all around the world in the last year under COVID, right from my home office here in Corbeil, Ontario. And so that has really, we've seen a real transferal. So you take that, or you also think about the cost of land and communities outside of the GTHA. and the fact that so much can be done pretty much from anywhere, that's going to be another factor. There'll always be, look, you're going to have the auto plants are in Windsor, Woodstock, Cambridge, Ingersoll, Oakville, Brampton, Oshawa. You're going to have that and then we've got, of course, up to Alliston. So you've got that 400 and 401 corridor. You're going to want your parts manufacturers located there. Having a part made somewhere else for just-in-time delivery is just not practical. So as long as our expectations are set correctly, I think you'll continue to see growth in all regions, more appropriate growth in the regions as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, because looking backwards, you can kind of think of the examples on one hand. I'm thinking of sort of like a Union Gas, now Enbridge, in the Chatham-Kent area, is saying, this is where we're going to have our headquarters for a variety of reasons, right? Perhaps they need the space, but the dollar goes a little bit further, the land value is a little better, the employees can be a little bit happier, they can experience a better quality of life living in these parts. So it's interesting to think about actively recruiting for those intangibles that maybe weren't necessarily at the front of the brochure in the past, right? It's not just an all dollars and cents conversation anymore, is it?
No, and it's going to be about people. It's going to be about immigration. It's going to be about the training as well. We've got a real opportunity here in Ontario to hit a reset button. I see Minister Monty McNaughton taking the training funds and helping those who have lost their job due to COVID, especially from the hospitality sector, and specifically retraining and pivoting to retrain them for the jobs that are available today. And I think that's a real critical move. I'm really pleased with the approach that our government is taking. You've heard me mention many ministries. It reinforces the fact we really are working together as a big unit, and the Premier wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, and the thing that I think you've touched on a few times today, if there was a theme, in addition to investment attraction, you mentioned the word speed a number of times, and I think it's about more than just speed of attracting business, but speed of retraining people, speed of adapting policy flexibility. Like, there are going to be new challenges, right? I mean, where do I file my taxes if my company is in the U.S. but I live in Canada, and so on and so on and so on. There's all sorts of things that could sort of manifest out of the pandemic. Probably not things that we're going to pontificate about on a recorded podcast until we can put more thought into it. But there really is a lot going on in this fast changing and dynamic landscape. So we'll take a look for that blue chip panel to be, or board rather, for Invest Ontario to be announced shortly. I don't think you're going to announce it today, but Minister, really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the podcast.
It's been great to talk to you, Mitch. I didn't even get to the Ontario Together Fund and the Ontario Together portal and the intellectual property strategy that we launched. Like Supply Ontario, all these new things. We'll just have to do it again.
All right. Anytime. You're welcome back on the program anytime.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you for listening to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the Strategy Corps Institute of Public Policy and Economy, produced by Sarah Bordeaux and myself. The views expressed during this podcast are not necessarily the views of Strategy Corp. All rights to this episode are reserved, and guests on the podcast may be current or past clients of Strategy Corp. To find out more about the Institute and to subscribe to our written material, or to find past episodes of the podcast, please visit our website at www.strategycorp.com/institute. Until next time.